Your brain is not your ally in isolation. This is the truth that survival guides don't tell you. They talk about water purification, fire starting, shelter building, the physical mechanics of staying alive. But they ignore the organ that fails first: your mind. The human brain evolved in tribes. For 200,000 years, isolation meant death. Separated from the group, you became prey. This isn't ancient history. It's coded into your neurology. When you're alone too long, your brain interprets it as a survival threat. Cortisol floods your system. Your amygdala, the fear center, activates and won't shut down. You become hypervigilant, anxious, paranoid. You start seeing threats that don't exist. Then come the hallucinations. Not because you're crazy, because your social brain, desperate for input it's designed to receive, starts manufacturing it. Voices, shadows, presences. The brain creates company because it cannot function without it. Prisoners in solitary confinement report these symptoms within days. Lone sailors report them within weeks. Blackout survivors report them within 72 hours. Your body might survive a week alone in the dark. Your mind won't make it 3 days without a fight. Number 1. The neuroscience of loneliness. Why your brain attacks itself. Let me explain what happens inside your skull when the lights go out and the silence settles in. Your brain processes approximately 11 million bits of sensory information every second. Most of this is subconscious. The hum of electricity, distant traffic, the subtle vibrations of civilization you've never consciously noticed. Your mind uses this constant input to construct reality, to confirm that the world exists and that you exist within it. Remove that input and the brain doesn't relax, it panics. Studies on sensory deprivation show that hallucinations can begin in as little as 15 minutes of complete darkness and silence. Within hours, subjects report complex visual and auditory phenomena, lights, patterns, voices, music that isn't playing. The brain, starved of external data, begins generating its own. This isn't malfunction. This is design. Your brain is a prediction machine. It constantly anticipates incoming sensory data based on past experience. When the data stops flowing, the predictions don't stop. They become the only show in town, and your mind cannot distinguish between predicted content and actual reality. Now add social isolation to sensory reduction. Research shows that loneliness triggers the same neural pathways as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, the region that processes the distress of social rejection, lights up identically whether you're excluded from a group or your leg is broken. Your brain treats isolation as injury, and injuries trigger stress responses. Cortisol floods your system, elevating anxiety and suppressing immune function. The amygdala goes into overdrive, scanning for threats that don't exist. Your prefrontal cortex, the rational planning part of your brain, gets overwhelmed by the limbic system's alarm bells. You become less capable of thinking clearly, precisely when clear thinking matters most. Number 2. The 72-hour timeline, how isolation breaks down the mind. There's a timeline to psychological breakdown in isolation. Understanding it might save your sanity. Hours, 0 to 12. The adjustment phase. At first, solitude feels manageable, maybe even peaceful. The absence of noise, demands, and social obligations can initially register as relief. Your brain hasn't yet recognized the threat. You're still running on the fumes of recent social contact. Hours, 12:24, the restlessness. The quiet stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling oppressive. You become acutely aware of small sounds, your own breathing, heartbeat, joints cracking. Time distortion begins. Minutes feel like hours. You start talking to yourself, not as a coping mechanism, but as an automatic attempt to fill the silence. Hours 24:48. The anxiety spiral cortisol levels rise significantly. Sleep becomes difficult despite exhaustion. You may experience intrusive thoughts, dark, repetitive, unwelcome, concentration fragments. Simple decisions feel overwhelming. Mild perceptual distortions begin. Shadows seem to move in peripheral vision. You hear your name called when no one's there. Hours 48:72. The breaking point. This is where documented psychological breakdown occurs. Studies show that 87.5% of subjects experience perceptual distortions and hallucinations after 48 hours. The hallucinations become complex, not just lights and sounds, but figures, voices with distinct personalities, entire scenarios that feel completely real. Your brain, desperate for social input, creates imaginary companions. Beyond 72 hours. The danger zone. Extended isolation causes measurable brain damage. Studies on solitary confinement show shrinkage in the hippocampus, up to 20% neuron loss in some cases. Memory deteriorates, cognitive function declines. The amygdala, overstimulated by constant threat signals, grows hyperactive while the prefrontal cortex weakens. These changes can become permanent. The timeline isn't universal. Individual variation exists, but the pattern is consistent across studies, survival accounts, and prisoner testimonies. Number 3, the evolutionary trap, why humans can't handle being alone. Here's the uncomfortable truth about human psychology. You weren't built for solitude. For approximately 200,000 years, humans existed in tribal groups. Isolation from the tribe didn't mean peace and quiet. It meant death. Predators targeted the separated. Food became harder to obtain alone. Injuries that the group could manage became fatal for individuals. Your brain evolved to treat isolation as an emergency. This is why loneliness activates your threat detection systems. The amygdala, your brain's alarm center, evolved to keep you alive by keeping you connected. When social contact drops below a threshold, it triggers the same cascade of stress hormones that would fire if you spotted a predator. Your body prepares to fight or flee from a danger you can't see, because the danger is the absence itself. Social safety theory, developed by neuroscientists, explains this mechanism. Perceived social threat, loneliness, isolation, rejection, triggers inflammatory responses, elevates cortisol, and impairs immune function. The brain doesn't distinguish between being abandoned by a tribe on the savannah and being alone in a dark house during a blackout. Both register as potentially fatal. This evolutionary programming made sense when isolation genuinely meant death. But in a modern blackout scenario, your threat detection system becomes your enemy. It floods you with anxiety about a danger that isn't physical. It keeps you hypervigilant when you need rest. It degrades your cognitive function when you need to think clearly. The very systems that evolved to protect you start working against you. Understanding this doesn't disable the programming, but it helps you recognize when your brain is lying to you about the nature of the threat. Number 4, the hallucination threshold. At some point in extended isolation, you will not be alone anymore. Not because someone arrived, because your brain manufactured company. This isn't metaphor. Isolation-induced hallucinations are among the most well-documented phenomena in psychology. Prisoners in solitary confinement report them. Solo sailors crossing oceans report them. Astronauts during extended space missions report them. And blackout survivors, alone in dark houses for days, report them. The mechanism is straightforward. Your brain is a social organ that requires social input to function normally. When deprived of external social stimuli, it generates internal substitutes. First come the simple hallucinations, hearing your name called, sensing presence in empty rooms, seeing movement in peripheral vision. These typically begin within 24-48 hours of isolation. Then come complex hallucinations, full conversations with people who aren't there, visual figures with distinct features, elaborate scenarios that feel indistinguishable from reality. Research shows these emerge reliably after 48-72 hours in isolated subjects. The terrifying part isn't that these hallucinations happen, it's that you often can't tell they're hallucinations. The brain doesn't flag its own generated content as artificial. The voice you hear feels like a real voice. The figure in the doorway looks like a real figure. Your reality testing functions, the cognitive processes that distinguish real from imagined, degrade under isolation stress. This is why solitary confinement is classified as torture by the United Nations. Not because of physical pain, but because forced isolation systematically dismantles the mind's ability to perceive reality accurately. A blackout creates the same conditions: darkness, silence, and solitude converging to push your brain past its designed operating parameters. Number 5. How stress hormones poison your thinking. Let's talk about the chemical warfare your own body wages against you during isolation. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. In short bursts, it's useful. It heightens alertness, mobilizes energy, prepares you for action. But cortisol is designed for acute threats: the lion attack, the enemy raid, the immediate danger that requires immediate response. Isolation isn't an acute threat, it's a chronic one. When isolation triggers your stress response and that response never resolves, cortisol levels stay elevated for hours, then days. And chronic cortisol exposure damages your brain. Research from Cleveland Clinic shows that sustained cortisol elevation impairs cognitive performance, compromises immune function, and increases risk for cardiovascular problems. The hippocampus, your memory center, literally shrinks under chronic cortisol exposure. Studies on long-term isolation show hippocampal volume reduction of up to 20%. This means isolation makes you worse at remembering things, processing information, and making decisions, precisely the cognitive functions you need most in a survival situation. But the cortisol cascade creates a vicious cycle. Elevated cortisol disrupts sleep. Sleep deprivation elevates cortisol further. Poor sleep impairs emotional regulation. Poor emotional regulation increases stress. More stress means more cortisol. The spiral feeds itself. After 24 hours without sleep, common during stressful isolation, hallucinations become significantly more likely. After 48 hours, 87.5% of subjects report perceptual distortions. Your body isn't trying to hurt you. It's responding to isolation the way evolution programmed it to respond, as if your life is in danger. But that response, sustained over days, becomes the danger itself. The threat isn't outside. The threat is the chemistry flooding your own neuron. Number 6. What sensory deprivation does to perception. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of something far more destabilizing. Your auditory system never shuts down. Even in perfect quiet, your ears are processing, and when there's nothing to process, the brain starts amplifying internal signals. The blood rushing through vessels near your eardrums, the faint electrical hum of your nervous system, your own heartbeat, suddenly loud enough to fill a room. This is why isolation environments feel loud despite their silence. But the real problem starts when your brain stops receiving enough sensory input to maintain its model of reality. Researchers call this the Ganzfeld effect. When uniform, unpatterned stimulation causes the perceptual system to amplify neural noise until hallucinations emerge. Studies show this happens in as little as 15 minutes. In a darkened house during a blackout, you're experiencing something similar. No screens, no artificial light, no background audio. The sensory environment becomes so impoverished that your brain begins filling gaps with generated content. First, you notice sounds that probably aren't there. Whispers, footsteps, your name. Then visual anomalies, shadows that move wrong, lights that flash without source, figures at the edge of vision. Your brain isn't malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it evolved to do, constructing a coherent model of reality from available data. When the data becomes insufficient, the model becomes increasingly fictional, but still feels completely real. This is why blackout survivors report feeling haunted, watched, accompanied by presences. The darkness and silence create perfect conditions for the brain to populate the void with phantoms of its own making. And you cannot simply choose to disbelieve what your senses present as real. Number 7. Structured routine. As psychological anchor. Now that you understand how isolation breaks the mind, let's discuss how to prevent that breakdown. The first and most powerful tool is structured routine. Your brain craves predictability. When external structure disappears, no work schedule, no social appointments, no digital calendar notifications, internal structure must replace it. Without imposed order, time becomes amorphous and anxiety fills the void. Create a schedule and follow it religiously. Wake at the same time each day, regardless of how you slept. Eat meals at consistent times even if you're not hungry. Designate specific hours for specific activities. Inventory checks in the morning, physical maintenance at midday, reading or rest in the evening. The content of the schedule matters less than its existence. Research on mental health during isolation consistently shows that routine reduces anxiety, improves sleep quality, and maintains cognitive function. The act of following a structure gives your brain the predictability it needs to avoid threat detection overdrive. Write your schedule down, not mentally, physically. Paper and pen if electronics are dead. The act of writing externalizes the structure, making it feel more real and binding. Include physical tasks that produce visible results, organizing supplies, cleaning living spaces, physical exercise. Your brain needs evidence of progress to maintain motivation and ward off despair. The enemy of sanity and isolation is formlessness, hours that blur together, days without distinction, time that loses meaning. Structure fights formlessness. Even if the routine feels arbitrary or silly, maintain it. Your rational mind might question why you're folding blankets at exactly 10 a.m. Your survival mind will thank you. Number 8, externalized self-talk. Here's something that will feel strange but might save your sanity. Talk to yourself out loud, not in your head, out loud, vocally, as if someone were listening. This isn't a sign of deterioration, it's a tool to prevent it. Research in psychology shows that externalized self-talk is a normal, healthy cognitive mechanism that improves focus, reduces anxiety, and maintains emotional regulation. In isolation, it becomes essential. Speaking aloud serves multiple functions. First, it breaks the silence that drives sensory deprivation symptoms. Your own voice becomes auditory input that your brain desperately needs. Second, it externalizes your thought process, making cognitive distortions easier to identify and correct. Third, and most importantly, it simulates social interaction. Your social brain doesn't fully distinguish between talking to another person and talking out loud to yourself. Both activate language centers, both create the experience of communication. Vocalized self-talk partially satisfies the brain's need for social exchange. Narrate your activities. Now I'm checking the water supply. I have 4 gallons remaining. That's enough for 2 days at current consumption. Verbalize your problem solving. The temperature is dropping. My options are adding layers, increasing activity, or using more blankets. Name things. Talk to objects if it helps. This is not madness. It's a deliberate strategy to maintain verbal fluency and create the illusion of company that your brain needs to stay calibrated. Prisoners in long-term solitary confinement who maintain vocalized self-talk show better psychological outcomes than those who go silent. Your voice is a lifeline. Use it. Number 9, journaling as psychological anchor. Writing serves a different but equally critical function. It externalizes your thoughts into physical form you can examine. In isolation, your thoughts become the entirety of your reality. Without external feedback, distorted thinking goes unchallenged. Paranoid thoughts, catastrophic thinking, and irrational fears can spiral unchecked because no one is there to offer perspective. A journal provides that perspective. When you write a thought down, you externalize it. It becomes an object you can observe rather than a current you're swept up in. Reading your own words creates psychological distance. You become both the writer and the reader, both the experiencer and the observer. This distance allows rational evaluation. Write about your emotional state daily. Be honest and specific. I'm feeling anxious because I heard sounds I couldn't identify is more useful than I feel bad. The specificity forces your brain to articulate the source of distress, which often reveals its irrationality. Track patterns over time. After several days, you can review entries and identify cognitive distortions, catastrophizing, black and white thinking, fortune-telling. Seeing these patterns on paper makes them easier to challenge. Research shows that journaling reduces symptoms of depression and anxiety by an average of 5%, statistically significant and meaningful during crisis conditions. Beyond emotional processing, use the journal for practical purposes. Inventory tracking, planning, recording observations about your environment. These concrete writing tasks anchor you in reality and provide evidence that time is passing productively. The pen is a tether to sanity. Write even when you have nothing to say. Number 10, physical movement as neural reset. Your body and mind are not separate systems. Physical movement directly impacts psychological state, and in isolation, deliberate movement becomes a powerful intervention. When stress hormones flood your system, your body prepares for physical action, fight or flight. But in a blackout scenario, there's nothing to fight and nowhere to flee. The stress chemicals remain in your system, continuing to signal danger, perpetuating anxiety. Physical movement metabolizes those chemicals. Exercise, even moderate movement, burns cortisol and adrenaline. It releases endorphins that counter anxiety. It engages the parasympathetic nervous system, shifting your body from threat response mode toward rest and digest equilibrium. You don't need a gym, you need movement. Pace if you must. Do bodyweight exercises, push-ups, squats, stretches. Climb stairs repeatedly if you have them. Dance in the darkness. No one is watching. The specific activity matters less than the consistent physical engagement. Schedule movement into your routine. Morning physical activity helps regulate circadian rhythms disrupted by lack of natural light. Evening stretching can improve sleep quality. Movement also breaks the mental loop of rumination. When anxious thoughts spiral, the mind becomes trapped in repetitive patterns. Physical activity forces attention into the body, interrupting the cognitive loop. Additionally, physical fatigue promotes sleep. Insomnia worsens every psychological symptom of isolation. Exhausting your body through movement creates the physiological conditions for rest, even when your anxious mind resists. When the darkness feels suffocating and your thoughts turn hostile, move. Your body is a tool for resetting your brain. Use it deliberately and consistently. Number 11. Manufactured purpose and mission. One of the most destructive aspects of isolation is the collapse of meaning. Normally, your sense of purpose is externally reinforced. Work deadlines, social obligations, family responsibilities. These give structure to your days and meaning to your actions. Remove them, and you face the void of meaninglessness. That void is psychologically dangerous. Research on prisoner psychology shows that those who maintain a sense of purpose, even an artificial one, fare better than those who succumb to purposelessness. Purpose provides motivation, direction, and reason to persist. In a blackout scenario, create missions for yourself. They don't have to be objectively important. What matters is that they feel important to you. Become obsessive about something. Inventory management, signal preparation, detailed logging of environmental conditions, physical training goals, memorization projects. Frame your situation as a challenge to overcome rather than a circumstance to endure. Special Forces training deliberately uses this reframing. Soldiers in survival scenarios are taught to treat their situation as a mission with objectives rather than a crisis to simply survive. The psychological difference is substantial. Mission-focused individuals show more resilience, better cognitive function, and higher survival rates. Assign yourself tasks beyond basic survival. Learn something new from any books available. Create something: art, writing, organize systems. Plan extensively for post-blackout actions. Give yourself reasons to reach tomorrow beyond merely not dying today. The human mind cannot tolerate meaninglessness indefinitely. Either you create meaning deliberately, or your mind will fill that vacuum with darkness. Purpose is a survival tool as essential as food and water. Manufacture it if you must. Isolation will try to break you. Not through physical deprivation, necro. You can survive days without food, water, and comfort if you must. But your mind, evolved for tribal existence and constant social input, will begin cracking within 72 hours of true solitude. This isn't weakness. It's neurobiology. Your brain interprets isolation as a survival threat because for 200,000 years it was. Cortisol floods your system. Your amygdala screams danger. Hallucinations emerge as your social brain manufactures the company it cannot function without. But knowledge is armor. Understanding the 72-hour timeline, the cortisol cascade, and the hallucination threshold means recognizing these symptoms as predictable biological responses, not signs that you're losing your mind. They're signs that your mind is doing exactly what evolution designed it to do in circumstances it was never meant to face. The coping mechanisms matter: structured routine, externalized self-talk, journaling, physical movement, manufactured purpose. These aren't optional comforts. They're psychological survival tools as essential as any physical supply. When the lights go out and the silence settles and you find yourself alone in the darkness, remember, the most dangerous threat isn't outside. It's the war your own brain will wage against itself. Prepare for that war. Understand its weapons. Develop your defenses. Because isolation doesn't break the body. It breaks the mind that hasn't learned to fight back.